Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya, the lady in red this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Reuben. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai. You know, we were having a lovely conversation just now about the politics and the business of doing hair and the beauty industry in this Nigeria.
Big industry. Big
I mean, it is. Let me tell you about what's happening around the world. Now, would you believe the United States has warned Israel, saying that it must increase the amount of humanitarian aid it's allowing into Gaza within the next 30 days, or it could risk losing access to US weapons funding. Now, two things jump out from that statement. Firstly, the United States has spent $17.9 billion in military aid to Israel since October 7th, 2023. Secondly, the US says Israel has 30 days to increase the aid into Gaza. But would you like to guess what will happen before those 30 days are through? Well, the US elections. So the question to ask is, does the US think that people are unaware of the game perhaps being played here? Clearly, there is a reluctance to stop Israel, which is only made more obvious by this empty threat, I believe it is. If you're saying that you would only follow through with this threat of reducing funding or removing funding in 30 days, it means that you would be waiting out first to see who wins the presidential elections. $17.9 billion, $17.9 billion in military aid in just over a year to Israel alone. Do you remember when Tupac said that they have money for wars, but they can't feed the poor? Yeah. This is a wonderful example of that. Well, staying on the theme now of international conflict, let's look at Ukraine. Ukraine has denied allegations that it has supplied drones to rebels fighting against both the Malian army and Russian-backed mercenaries in the country. Now, France's Le Monde newspaper reported that Ukrainian drones were providing support to the rebels in Mali. Now, Mali's junta even led government ended a long-running alliance with former colonial power France back in 2022 in favor of a relationship with Russia in a bid to tackle a years-long insurgency in the north of the country. But it's been unable to end the unrest and recently suffered heavy losses alongside its Russian allies. Mali and its neighbours Niger, as well as Burkina Faso, where the military is also in charge, have since accused Kyiv of supporting terrorism in the Sahel region after a Ukrainian official said earlier this year that the country had offered support to the rebels. Rufai, I'll come to you for comment just quickly. Then we'll move on to our newspapers because there's a lot to discuss in our newspaper this morning.
I mean, I get the hypocrisy of America. You're saying, oh, put aid in, but you're also supporting the funding, bombing the place down. You've expended over 17 billion. You've even expended way more than that on the Ukrainian war. I mean, that one is justified, but the one in Israel, for me, is not justified because I would have thought that after that reciprocal action, they ought to have gone for a ceasefire at some point and stop all of this madness. But you are pounding the region and you're telling them that, oh, if you don't put aid in. You saw what happened at Al-Asa recently. You saw what happened even at the refugee camp recently. And Israel keeps doing this and America keeps supporting them. But in all fairness to America, America has also done a lot of things, you know, to be able to support and fight disease and everything. I was just checking through PEPFAR. President Bush, PEPFAR has expended over $110 billion. In fact, that was the largest single donation and funding to fight a particular disease, PEPFAR was HIV/AIDS, by anybody in the world until COVID pandemic came that we obviously expended more because it was a global pandemic. So in all fairness to them, they still do it. That was
under the Bush administration?
No, it still goes until date.
Okay.
I said until now, from the Bush administration till now, PEPFAR has cost over $110 billion for America. So they still do a lot of charity work around the world, you know, because they want the soft power. But in all fairness, I get what you're saying. It's the hypocrisy that makes them continue all of this madness and all of this shenanigans.
Agreed. My colleagues, I'll come to you both for your comments on these stories. Let's take these papers and then you can mix your comments in between them. Let's start with the front page of This Day. And today is World Food Day. And this day's front page coincidentally looks at how Nigeria's inflation rate has reached 32.7% amid higher food prices and as well as the higher cost of energy. Now, the continued inflationary pressures have dashed hopes of a potential reduction in the MPR, which is the monetary policy rate, and that is the benchmark interest rates which dictates the cost of money in an economy. Moving on to The Guardian, and The Guardian stays with inflation too. The Guardian's front page says Nigerians are begging and borrowing for survival. Further, using the conservative estimate of the national average cost of a healthy diet, which is 1,255 naira per meal as of August's figures, one family of 4 would require 150,000 naira a month in order for them to have just one meal every day. Moving on to the New Telegraph, and it leads with the party crisis, or at least some form of resolution within the People's Democratic Party, as the battle for control of the party has shifted to the National Executive Committee. There's a meeting scheduled for October 2024. Now, this is coming on the heels of the intervention by the PDP Governors Forum in the crisis that broke out in the National Working Committee of the party just last week. Back then, they broke into factions, that's the PDPs and the NWC. They broke into factions last week following the suspension of the National Publicity Secretary and the National Legal Advisor for alleged insubordination and disloyalty. The Daily Independent also shares its front page, also leads with this PDP news that some voices in the party have called for the removal of the resident electoral commissioner in Ondo State ahead of the forthcoming November 16 gubernatorial election in Ondo. While flagging off its campaign in Accra, the party disclosed that the REC has ties with the state, hence the tendency to be biased, they believe. Now, Governor of Oyo State, who is also the leader of the party in the southwest of Nigeria, has also urged the national chairman of INEC not to allow anybody, including Babalola, to superintend over the election. Its picture story too, the Daily Independent, has Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu during the flag-off of commercial operations of the Red Line Rail. The Daily Sun reports on an uproar in the Senate over the push to test politicians for drugs. A bill sponsored by Senator Rufai Hanga of Kano Central titled, your namesake. It's titled A Bill for an Act to Establish National Institute for Drug Awareness and Rehabilitation 2024. It was introduced during plenary on Tuesday. Now, leading the debate on the general principles of this bill was Senator Hanga, and he said the institute, if established, would coordinate and promote drug awareness, prevent substance abuse, and facilitate the rehabilitation of drug users. But Senator Sumaila of Kano South, see, it's both of these men representing Kano, he said that the institute would not help the situation until politicians change their way of doing things. He then suggested to get rid of drug abuse and peddling, all politicians seeking elective offices must be made to undergo drug tests. Sumaila also challenged politicians, including his colleagues at the Senate, to swear by the Holy Quran or the Holy Bible that they were not culpable. Goodness. Let us move on to our African papers. Dr. Umar, I'll come to you for your thoughts on that too. Let's move on to our African papers. Now, the Citizen of South Africa leads with criticism of the Gauteng Department of Education, which is being criticized for its management of a recent racism controversy at Pretoria High School for Girls. Back in July, 12 white students were suspended for allegedly making racist remarks on a WhatsApp group. However, following an independent disciplinary hearing, the students, 8 of whom were prefects, were found not guilty of the charges leveled against them and were subsequently reinstated. Now, investigation by the Gauteng Department of Education also led to the suspension of a school principal at that school who was found to have neglected to address complaints of racism that were initially reported back in 2023. That principal has been reassigned to another district and remains there. The Daily Nation of Kenya, shall we call it D-Day in Kenya? Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua faces an uphill battle for survival in the Senate today as a 3-judge bench is to rule on his attempt to stop senators from proceeding with the impeachment case against him. And then lastly, let's take a look at some British papers. The Daily Mail has Keir Starmer and still this Taylor Swift concert scandal. This time it's being reported that he and his family attended the concert at Wembley Stadium after his own ministers pressured the Metropolitan Police into getting a blue light escort convoy, and also said that the Prime Minister, his wife, also met Taylor Swift and her mother backstage. Also to the top of the page is also a concern over the controversial assisted dying bill, which could go from having the right to die, which is the debate on the table, to perhaps becoming a duty to die, which is a concern shared by the Archbishop of Canterbury. And lastly, the Metro reports that the Prime Minister has praised plans to give overweight, unemployed people in the United Kingdom weight loss medications to get them back into work. A move the article says will save billions for the NHS. Now, Health Secretary Wes Streeting says weight loss medication could be very important for the UK economy and for health. Dr. Rubin?
After the reportage, can we deal with some of the issues?
Sure.
I think in the case of US, one in Israel,
Okay.
now the White House, the Pentagon, have both said that this is a private correspondence between the secretary in charge of national security,
Sure.
What's his name now? Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, and also the Chief of Defense Staff, Lloyd Austin. And what this shows is that there is an international concern about how Israel is dealing with, a humanitarian causes.
Sure.
Now, what we know is that World Food Program, their officials have been killed. Amnesty International officials have been caught in the crossfire. Over 400,000 persons are stranded in northern Gaza. Over 1 million have had to evacuate to Syria and other parts of the world in Lebanon. With Netanyahu insisting that, look, he is looking for total victory. Now, these two American officials are saying that, look, you must respect international humanitarian law because there is a national security memorandum, NSM 20, that was signed between the United States and its allies in March, saying that American hardware or software cannot be used to violate international humanitarian law. And under the international law of armed conflict, persons who are hard to compare, persons who are not involved in the conflict, prisoners of war, etc., are supposed to be treated fairly under international law. So the South Africans, they've gone to the ICJ to say Israel is misbehaving. There is a case in the ICC, International Criminal Court, saying that, look, Israel is violating international law. So there has been an escalation of humanitarian rights violations since that memorandum, NSR 20, was signed in March.
Sure.
This is the whole point. James Kirby of the National Security Council is saying that this is not a threat. This is just a personal opinion of Anthony Blinken and Lloyd Austin. But in any case, it reflects international sentiments about how Israel is behaving. And it's also in line with protestations that have been put on the table by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Now, Mali, Niger. Yes, Kiev has said, look, we're not in this. We respect international law, which talks about respect for the sovereignty of other states, and which talks about non-interference in internal affairs. This is the statement that came from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Ukraine. And they are saying that the aggressor is Russia. But the big fear that we have to worry about as persons who watch the subject is that Africa should not become a battleground for proxy war between Ukraine and Russia. This is our fear. Wagner mercenaries operating in the region, what do they call them? Tuareg jihadists fighting the military junta in Niger and Mali and Burkina Faso. I think as Africans, we should say our continent should become proxy war. I saw Senator Sumaila who is saying they should have a drug test for Nigerian senators. Yes. Not just senators, politicians, whether they are in local councils or anywhere. I think that he has made a very popular point that many Nigerians will agree with him, so that we can have good governance. Because how do they say it? It's only people who have a good brain, good minds that can lead Nigerians.
Let me talk about that, because that's actually important for me. We have a drug problem on our hands, yes, that we are not actually admitting or owning. Yes. That conversation was just beyond the politics of it. He gave some startling facts or information that I think should be investigated further. Sure. This argument came about because he's trying to sponsor a bill which would establish a new agency. Now that's contentious because there's NDLEA that would handle narcotics issue and rehabilitate drug addicts. Sure. But what he said on the floor was that there were some politicians, including members, his colleagues, who in their constituencies and in their homes, they stockpile drugs. And that during elections, they give supporters, it's used as an incentive. So they actually propagate these drug problems that we have. So it's beyond asking them to take drug tests. It's also saying that they are sponsors of this lifestyle. And it is done for their own personal and political gain. These are strong allegations that ought to be investigated. Of course, the Deputy Senate, the leader of the House, Senator Jibrin Barao, had then ruled and said that, he was out of order. Then there was a big debate around whether or not a new agency needed to be established. But the bigger concern for him, which I think should be at the heart of a lot of politicians, is that his people, his constituents in Kano State are suffering. It is a problem. We're not owning it. We're not taking charge of it. And there are a lot of security agents, operatives, politicians are peddlers of drugs. So it's not just the people. If the people who are supposed to be legislating, are supposed to be, checking, putting checks and balances, are the ones perpetuating it and funding it, then we have a serious problem on our hands. And either we face that and address these issues, or in a matter of years, remember sweet codeine, that was just a tip of the iceberg. A number of, especially in the northern parts, we need to investigate that. And in other parts of Nigeria, our younger people, he said in secondary schools, we have a drug problem that we need to sort out. We can no longer bury our heads in the sand. And if it takes legislation, I mean, strengthening the NDLEA, for instance, we don't just want to see shows of burning of, we've recovered. Let's start from home here. People in their constituents, in their homes, according to Senator Kuwa, have stockpiles of drugs in their homes. We need to sort that out.
I mean, if it was a sensible country, as he said that thing, but the sad thing is we are not sensible. We don't, it's only what is in our own interest we do. If it was a sensible country, as he said that thing, NDLEA ought to have started investigation. They should be raiding those homes now. They should be bringing that. Because, see, most of the people that have been caught in drug shenanigans have been political associates. There was one that was stopped recently. That was a political associate to a certain governor. We've had many of them. And politicians use the fact that they are politicians and politically exposed people to take this drug around. And see, if you truly do that test like he claims, I doubt the percentage of people that will pass that drug test in that house.
So you think in addition to peddling, there are also users, which is what...
If you think I am lying, I dare all the senators in the House and no, let me finish your about it. I'm on my point, please. I dare all the lawmakers in the House to please take a public drug test and indicate their drug records, if they are clean or not. I dare.
That's urine and
hair
follicle test.
The country will scatter.
I just wanted to add the caveat that we should beware of group libel. It's not everybody in the National Assembly that is a drug addict.
Hey, that's why they should take the test now. Make it public. In fact, it should even, in fact, Dr. Bati, the point I want to make is, it should even be a mandatory requirement when you're submitting your documents with INEC.
No, we agree on that.
A drug test.
We agree on
Let's know what we are dealing
not
with
to
now.
say if they all take the test, maybe one person will not pass.
No, I dare them. They should take it now.
No. Let's avoid group libel.
It's not group libel. They should take it.
There's something called that.
It's not group libel.
There's something called group libel. We must avoid that. And now, to go forward, in Britain, they say the Prime Minister collected tickets from Taylor Swift for giving her a blue spot security and all of that. Well, this Kestama's family, they just like to collect freebies, glasses, suits, fashion, and all that. Well, you can see that it's not only in Nigeria that the politicians misbehave. Even Kestama and his wife, they say no, we can collect freebies. It has nothing to do with state policy.
He'll give them back. I think he said he has given those gifts back.
Politicians are the same.
He can't give back the concert at least. He's already enjoyed that one.
I know if you remember on this table, yet again, I hate to say I told you so. I predicted. In fact, I gave it 2 months. I said 6 months down the line, it was going to crumble like a pack of cards. It's not up to 6 months.
We need to. All right, thank you so much.
Always a pleasure.